Code Explained says hi. Today we are going to create the Tic Tac Toe game using JavaScript. In our game, you can play with a friend or a computer, which means we're gonna need to build some simple AI for our game. If I hit play directly, the opponent buttons here will turn red. So I'm gonna go for computer. And the same thing will happen if I don't choose symbol. I'm gonna go for O and play. I'm gonna try and beat the computer. Oops, no winner, it's a tie. I'm gonna play again with the computer, and this time I'm gonna let the computer wins. So the computer here is the winner. Last time I'm gonna try to play with a friend, which is myself. I'm gonna try to win myself with O's. That's it. So this is a preview of our game, and this is really a project, simple project to build, but trust me, there are a lot of things to learn in the way. So let's go. So before I go and talk about the game logic, I need first to talk about the canvas. So you can create it using JavaScript or just HTML. So I'm gonna create an element called canvas with an ID, a width, and a height. So this will create an element with a width of 450 pixels and a height of 450 pixels. So we created the element. Now we need to draw shapes and we need to move them. So for that we're gonna use JavaScript. First thing, you need to select the canvas. So you're gonna select it using a method. So I'm gonna use getElementById, takes in the ID of our canvas here. Assign that to a constant called canvas. And then I will need to get the context of my canvas and assign it to a constant called context. Now let's take a look on our context object here in our console. So when you take a look on context, you'll find here, or you'll get a bunch of properties and methods. For example, here you have fill style property. So this is the color with you can or you will fill the shapes. So it's by default black. If you want to change it, you can say context, our object here, dot fill style equals a color you want. Then, for example, if you want to draw a circle, you're going to be using a method, arc. So you're going to say context.arc and then the arguments it needs. For example, to fill a shape, you're going to use fill method. For example, to fill a rectangle and draw a rectangle, you're going to be using fill rect. For example, to draw an image, you're going to use the draw image function or method here, draw image, etc. So let's go and see some examples. For example, to draw a rectangle, you will need to use the fill rect method. It takes in some arguments here, which are the x position and the y position. So before that, you need to know that this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. So if you say 150 pixels for x, you're gonna start from the left and take 150 pixels from there. And if you say y is 100 pixels, you're gonna start from the top and take 100 pixels from there. Now for our rectangle, its width and height are both equal to 50 pixels, which means our rectangle will be drawn here with a width of 50 pixels and a height of 50 pixels. It's easy. Now let's talk about drawing just the stroke without filling the rectangle. For that, we're going to use the stroke rect method. It takes in the same arguments as the fill rect. So this is the x and y position. Again, the x-axis is this, so I'm gonna take 250 pixels from the left and 200 from the top. Then the width and the height both equal to 50 pixels. Then there is our rectangle stroke. And also to draw an image, we're going to be using the drawImage method. It takes in the image itself, the image object, and the X and Y position. Same as here, 350 pixels from the left for X and 300 pixels from the top for Y. So our image will be drawn in this position. Now let's talk about the HTML part. So the first thing the player will see is the options. For that we need a div with the class name options. Inside we have the title here of the game, then an H2 which says play versus, then the computer button here which is a div with the class computer, and friend here the button, and symbol here an H2, and then the X and O buttons which are both divs, and then the play button here which is also a div with the class name play. Now when the player clicks on play, he will find himself in front of the canvas. So we need also to create the canvas element here with an ID, a width and a height. And then when it's a game over, we're going to show this to the user. So another div with the class name game over. Now we have our canvas first, then options, then game over, which means our canvas here is hidden by the options, and the options here is hidden by the game over, which means we need to hide this div here by adding the hide class name. If we take a look on the hide class name inside our CSS, it says display is set to none, and then all of these will be inside a container and then inside our basic HTML code. Inside our head we need to set a title for our file and also link our started CSS file to our HTML code. And at the bottom here we're gonna need to link our JavaScript code to our HTML. So we have here two JavaScript files. So the first one is options.js. This code here, or inside the options.js, will handle these menu here, and the code inside game.js will handle our game here. So let's now talk about the code inside options.js. So the first thing the user or the player sees is this menu here. So to deal with these elements here and all the buttons, we need first to select them using, for example, the query selector method. So I'm going to select all the elements, and then the user will click on these buttons, which means we need to listen to the user's click on these buttons, which means I need to add an event listener to each button. So I'm gonna add an event listener to the computer button, to the friend button, to the O button and X button, and also to the play button. Now when the player clicks on some of these buttons here, we need to store those informations somewhere, which means we need an object player and also a variable called opponent. Now when the user, for example, clicks on computer button here, we need to change the opponent to computer, and instead if he clicks on the friend button, we need to change the opponent to friend. And then if he clicks, for example, on O button here for the symbol here, then we need to set the player.man equals O. So let's talk about the player here. So the player object here has three properties. The first one is man for the one he is playing, for example me, and then the friend, and then the computer. So for example when we click on O button, then the player.man will receive the O, and then the player.computer and friend will receive the X. So you may say, why set them both the X? If the opponent, for example, is the computer, we need just to set the computer to X, not the friend. So here I'm just going the easy way. So I just don't want to use an if statement here. I just don't want to say if, for example, the opponent is the computer, then set the player that computer to X, or otherwise if it's friend, set the player that friend to X. So I just don't want to go into that. So the easy way, or the easiest way, is to go and change both the computer and friend properties to X. Now if it clicks on the X button here, I'm gonna say player.man equals X, and the player, the computer, and friend both equals O. Now when I click on the computer button, we need to turn it, or to set the background to black and the text color to white. So in this case, I'm gonna need to add inside my CSS file a class name called active, where the background is set to black and the color of the text is set to white. I added here the important key, so I make sure that these ones here are the ones that takes effect when I add the active class to any of these buttons here. Okay, now let's say I clicked on the computer first and then I chose to play with a friend. So here we need to remove the active class from the computer and add it instead to our button friend here. So here I will need a function that will remove the active class from the class I call off, so the one I want to remove the active from, and add the active class to the class I call on for the one I want to add the active class to it. To do that, we need first to get the class list of the element and then remove or add that this active class name here to the class list. So I'm gonna put this inside the function called switch active from off to on element. So here, when I click on the computer button, I will need to switch active, so I will need to make it off, or to remove it from friend button and add it to the computer button. Here, remove it from computer button and add it instead to the friend button. Here, when I click on the O button, for example, I will need to remove it from X but add it to O button, and also here, when I click on the X button, remove it from O and add it to X button. Now when the user or the player doesn't choose an opponent and clicks on the play button here, then we need to make the background here red. So when I click on the play button, I will need to check if there is not an opponent. If there is no opponent, means we didn't get to these lines here, which means we didn't click on the computer or the friend button. So if this is true, we need to make the computer button background color red and also the friend button background color red. And then I'm gonna say return, so this will prevent any code at the bottom here from running. Now if I select, for example, the computer and didn't select the sample and click play again, so now this is false, but here I'm gonna say again if there is no player.man, which means we didn't get to these lines here, which means we didn't click on any of these buttons here. I'm gonna change the X and O buttons to background color to red, and also we need to say return to prevent the code here to run. Now if I select the computer or the opponent and the symbol and I click on play, I will need to call a function called init that will take in the player here and the opponent. The init function here lives inside our game.js. It's where the code for the game lives. After this, I will need to add the hide class name to the options element, which means when I click on play, I will need to hide the options element so I can play the game on the canvas. So when we click on the play button, we end up facing the board. So when we call the function init, the first thing we're gonna do is to draw the board. So this is what our board looks like. It has here some columns, 3 columns, and rows. So here we need to create 2 constant, column and row, both equal to 3. Now we have columns and rows, which means we have an array, which means we need to create an array. Board equals an array. Our array here, 0, 1, 2, so 3 rows, which means I need to create them using a for loop. So I'm going to use a for loop that starts from 0 and stop when we reach 2. So 2 here is less than 3, the number of the rows. And I'm going to create the rows, which are an array. So our board here is a two-dimensional array. So we have 3 rows, and every row by itself it's another array. So this is a two-dimensional array. The same here for the columns. We have here the first column, the second, and the third column, which means I need another for loop inside my first one. So every row here has 3 columns. So every row will have 3 columns here. So inside my second for loop, I'm going to create the columns, and I'm going to leave it like that for now. Now we need to draw these spaces here, every space, which means we're going to need to use the StrawCorrect method. But first we need to define the context, which means we need to select our canvas and then get the context of the canvas using the method getContext. Now our StrawCorrect here will take in the X position, the Y position, and the width and the height. The width of a space here is given by 150 pixels. So they all have the same width. That's why we said the width of our canvas is 450 pixels. Now the same for the height, it's also 150 pixels, and the same for all the other spaces. Now I'm not gonna define a constant for the width and another one for the height. I'm gonna just create one constant here, space size, for both the width and the height, which is equal to 150. Now for the X and Y position here, we need to know the X and position of every space. So this is the X axis for our canvas, and this is the Y axis for our canvas. In our canvas, the top right or the top left corner here, its position is given by X equals 0 and Y position is also 0. Now when we reach this place here or this position here, all these spaces here have the same X position, which is 150 pixels, because the space or the space width is 150 pixels. The same for these spaces here, the X position is 300. Now 300 here is just 2 times space size. So, and here 1 times space size, and here 0 times space size. So 0, 1, 2 are just the number of the column. So if you want to know the X position of a space, you just need to know the number of its column. Now for the Y position, it's going to be just the same. So I'm going to say here 0, the number of the row, times space size, 1 times space size, 2 times space size. Now to draw them, we're just going to use the StrawCorrect method here. Takes in the width and the height. For the X position here of the space, it's given by J, the number of the column, times space size. So I'm going to say J times space size. And for the Y position, it's given by the I, number of the row, times space size. So I'm going to say I times space size. And also I need to define the color of the stroke. So I'm going to say context.stroke style equals black. So the stroke here, color is black. Now later on, we will need to check for the winner. So dealing with a two-dimensional array will be so hard for us. So to make it easy, we're gonna just use a simple one-dimensional array. So I'm gonna go and give every space an ID. For example, the first 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So here I'm gonna create a variable called ID, which is I'm gonna initiate with 0. Then here every tile or every space will get that ID, and then after I create the space and draw it, I'm gonna increment the ID by 1. I'm gonna put this inside a function called DrawOnBoard, and I need to call the DrawOnBoard to draw the board. So that's it. We said that we're not gonna deal with our board array because it's a two-dimensional array, and that will make it hard on us. So instead we're gonna work with a one-dimensional array, which we'll call game data. So it's an array, it's a one-dimensional array. So here the first element has the index 0 and the last has the index 8, which are simply the IDs of our spaces. So when the user, for example, clicks on a space, we need to know the ID of that space so we know which one here, which element here we're gonna update. So we need to know the ID here of the space. To know the ID of the space, we need to know the I and j of that space. To know the I and j of that space, we need to know the x and y position of where the user clicked. For example, let's say the user clicked on this position here. What we're gonna know by then is the x position of where he clicked, for example 350 pixels, and the y position of where he clicked. So we knew the x by knowing the j number and the y by knowing the I number, the number of the rows. Now we're gonna define or determine the number j and I from x and y. So for example here, this is the first row, which means I will be 0, and this is the second column, which means the j will be 2. So the board with index 0 and 2 will return the ID 2. In this case, we will go and update our game data with index 2 with the player symbol, let's say x. Then if the other player comes and click on the center here and the space in the center here, which has the index 4, then we're gonna go in our game data and update the element with the index 4 with its symbol. Now let's see this using code. So we're gonna need to add an event listener to our canvas, which is the click event here. Now if I click, for example, on this space here and take a look on my event here, so my function here will take an event as argument, the click event. If I take a look on the event in my console, I will find some properties here. The one I need is the x and y position of where I clicked. So we will know the x position and y position of where I clicked by the client x and client y properties. The problem here is that the event.client x will return the x position of where I clicked from the left side of the viewport, and the same for the y position. It will return the y position of where I clicked from the top of the viewport. But for us, for example, the x position of the space is taken from the left side of the canvas, not the left side of, for example, the viewport. So here we're gonna need to subtract the canvas.x position of our event.client x to get the x position of where clicked relatively to our canvas. Here also we need to subtract the canvas.y from the event.client y to get the y position of where we clicked. So I'm gonna say canvas.getBoundingClientRect.x. So the getBoundingClientRect method here will return the x and y position of our canvas and also its width and height, etc. All we need to use here is the x position of our canvas and the y position of our canvas. Now after I know the x and y position of where I clicked, I want to know now the I and G of that space. Let's see an example here. Let's say x equals 200 and y equals 195. So, before we defined or determine y using this equation here. So y is I times space size and x is j times space size. Using simple math, we can find that I is y divided by space size and also j is x divided by space size. So for I here, we're going to say I 195 divided by 150, which is 1.3. But for our number of the rows and number of the columns, they are integers. So I'm going to use math.flow method. This will return the greatest integer less than 1.3, which is 1. The same here, j equals 200 for x divided by 150 for the space size. This will return 1.333. I'm going to use math.flow again, and then we'll get j equals 1. So I1, J1, which means this space here. Now that I know this space here, I can know the ID and I can exactly know which one I can update in my game data, which element I can update in my game data array. So in terms of code, we're going to say let I equals y divided by space. Then I'm going to use math.flow to get an integer. Then the same for j. So what we're doing here is that on player's click, we need to determine the ing of the space. After that, we're going to need to know the ID. So in terms of code, we're going to say let id equals board with index ing. So now that I know the ID here, I will need to go and update my game data. My game data here is an array, one-dimensional array, because it's going to be hard to work with a two-dimensional array. Then I'm going to define it as an array with 9 elements. So with 9 elements, they all have an index here, which is the ID of the spaces here. So for example, if I click on this space here, its ID is 0, 1, 2, so it's 2. So I'm gonna go and update the game data with index 2 with x. If the opponent clicks on the center here, its index is 4, so I'm gonna update 4 with O. So here I'm gonna say game data with index ID equals the current player. So the current player might be X or O. By default, when the game starts, the current player is the player that man. After this finishes, we're gonna give the turn to the other player. For example, let's say the computer or the friend. One problem here is, let's say that the user X or the player X clicked on this one, then the player O clicked on the center one, and then the X come again and play the same space. In this case, we need to ignore that move. So we have to say f game data ID return. So you're going to say if the game data exists, it's not empty, like game data 0 here, it's empty. So if it's not empty, then return. So game data 0, it's empty, which means false. So we're not going to say return. Game data, for example, with index 2, it's not empty, which means true. Then we're going to say return. Now after this, all I have to do to complete the game is to create a function called DrawOnBoard. The function DrawOnBoard here will draw an image based on the player. So if it's X, we're going to draw the X image. If it's O, we're going to draw the O image. Then after the player's move, we're going to determine if he's the winner. If he's the winner, we're going to show the game over and set the game over variable to true. The game over variable here will help us to exit from the function when it's a game over. So no one can play any other move after it's a game over. Now, if there is no winner, we're gonna check if there is a tie. If there is a tie game, then again, we're gonna show the game over message and turn the game over to true. And then if none of this is true, we're gonna need to give the turn to the other player. So I'm gonna check if the current player is the player.man, then the current player will be player.friend. Else, if it was the player.friend, then the current player now would be the player.man. Now for the DrawOnBoard, for example, if I click on this space here, I need to draw an image, and if the other player clicks on this here, we need to draw the other image, the X image here. So to draw an image, we said that we're gonna use the drawImage method that takes in the image, the X and Y position. So this means that we need to load first the images, so the X image, we're gonna say new image, then we're gonna set the property source. So our images are inside the folder called image. So for example, for the X image, it's called cross.png. Then for the O image, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna set the property source, the image source.png. Now that we loaded the images, we're gonna create our function DrawOnBoard. So we're gonna use the draw image. The draw image will take in an image. So this image here might be the O image or X image. We still need to determine which one played. Then the X position is given by J times space size. So every space here has a J, and its X position is given by J times space size. The space position X and Y is the same as the image that we're gonna draw on that space. So I'm gonna see here for the Y position I times space size. Now for the image here, we need to check if the player is the X player, then we're gonna use the X image, this one here. Else if it's not the X player, then it's the O player, so we're gonna use the O image. Our DrawOnBoard function here will take in as parameters the player and the I and G. The I and G, or the number of the row and of the column of the space. Let's now talk about isWinner function. So we have here our board. Every space here has a unique ID. So when the player puts his sample horizontally in these spaces here, then he is a winner. So if he successfully put, for example, X on 0, 3, 6, then he is a winner. Also on 1, 4, 7, also on 2, 5, 8, 0, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, and diagonally 0, 4, 8, and 2, 4, 6, or 6, 4, 2. Now I'm gonna put this inside a constant called combos, which is an array. So we have here again a two-dimensional array. So let's see an example here. Let's say that the X played the second or the space with ID 2, then we're gonna set X to this one here. Then here we set O to 4, 0, or this is 5, X to 5 here, and then 0 here, O to 0, and then X to 8 here. So to check now if the X is the winner, it's simple. All we're gonna do is to go and check row by row, and inside every row we're gonna check if these IDs here on our game data has the X symbol or not. So let's take an example. So we're gonna go and enter to the first row here, and then we're gonna check game data with index 0. Does it have X or not? So it has not X, so this will return false. 3, it doesn't have X, so false. 6, it doesn't have X, so false. False and false and false, then is false. So it doesn't win using this combination here. Now 1, it doesn't have X, 2, 4 also, 7 also. So false and false and false, then it's false. Now, if we check game data with 2 here, game data with 2 has X, so that's true. Game data with index 5, it has X, so that's another true. So true and true, now it's true. Game data with index 8 now has X, so that's true. So true and true and true, then that's true, then X wins. So now, how can we go and check row by row? Simply, we're going to use a for loop that starts from 0 till the combos.length. So we're going to check a row by row. Then inside every row, we're going to check these elements here, which are simply the ID of our board spaces. So we're going to need to use another for loop here that will check for the elements inside every row here. Now these elements here are IDs of the spaces, so I'm going to say let ID here equals combos with IG. Now I'm going to check if the game data with the index ID here is the player. So we're going to check if the game data with an ID is player, is that player. We are checking if he's a winner or not. But first, whenever I go to a row, I will assume that the variable 1 here is true. So I will assume that the player is winning. And then check if the game data with index ID is the player and 1. So for example, as this return false, then false and true will remain false, even if all the others return true. I'm going to assign this to 1. Let's see an example here with the X player. So let's say we are in this one here, 2, 4, 6. So I'm going to go and say 1 equals true. We are in the last row. Now I enter into a row here. I'm going to check for 2. So game data with index 2, is it X? Game data with index 2, yes, it's X, then true. True and true is true. 1 now is still true. I'm going to go to the second one. G equals now 1. So we are in 4 here. The ID here is 4. Game data with 4 here is not X. So this will return false. False and true is false. Then 1 here is now false. Now even if 6 now is true, 1 will remain false. Now after we end this loop here, we're going to check if 1. If 1 is true, then we return true. If we check all the combinations and we didn't get nothing, then we return false. Now I'm going to put this a function called isWinner. IsWinner function will need 2 parameters. The first one is the player. Is it the X or O player? We are checking if he is a player or not. And also we need to pass in the game data array. So that's it for isWinner function. Now if isWinner function didn't come with a winner, so it returned false, then now it's the turn of isTie function. So let's say an example of a game. So in this game there is no winner and the board is filled. It means it's a tie. So our function here isTie, all what it has to do is to determine if the board is filled or not. To know that, we're going to assume that the board is filled, like we did before with the isWinner function. We're going to assume it is filled. Then here we're going to determine is really filled. If it's filled, we're going to return true. If it's not, we're going to return false. How can we know that it's filled or not? We're going to just go and check a space by space. So I'm going to use a for loop to loop over my game data array and then check if the game data with index I is empty or not. So if game data I is empty, this code here will return false. If it's not empty, this code will return true. So game data with index I and isBoard fell, and then we'll assign this to isBoard fell. So if all these spaces are full and there is one and only one empty space, then will return false. So our isTie function here will need just one argument or one parameter, which is the game data here. So for our game over, we have three possible messages. The winner is X, the winner is O, oops, no winner, it's a tie. So these are all H1. The only difference here, when it's a tie, we're gonna say oops, no winner. When there's a winner, we're gonna say the winner is. Also, these are all images. What changes is only the names. They are all in the same folder. Now, in terms of code, we're gonna say H1, so the element H1 here, the variable message. So the message here might be the winner is or oops, no winner. So we need to do some kind of if statement. Then we're gonna show the image. So what changes here is just the source. They are all images. Then here at the bottom, we're gonna show the play again, which when we click on it, we just run this code here, location.reload, that will reload our or refresh our page. Now we're gonna assign this to the inner HTML of our game over element, which means we first need to select our game over element using query selector. Don't forget that the game over element here is hidden because we added, beside the game over class, we added a hide. So when we change the game over element inner HTML, we need also to remove the hide class name from the class list of our game over element to make it visible. Now for our function show game over, we take only one parameter, which is the player, X or O or tie if it's a tie. Now the image source is given by the image folder / the player.png. So this might be O. So if it's O, then we are showing this image here. If it's X, then we are showing this image here. If it's tie, then we are showing this image here. Now we're gonna check if the player is tie, then we're gonna show oops, no winner. Else, if it's not a tie, then it's X or O, then I'm gonna show the winner is. We're gonna assign this to the variable message, which is this one here. Now inside our function here that fires up when we click on the canvas, when we check if is winner, the show game over here will take in the current player. The current player might be X or O. Then if there's no winner and it's a tie, the show game over here will take in tie as argument, and then we will show tie and oops, no winner message. Are you ready now to go and type in the code? Before that, if you are not already subscribed, please hit the button and subscribe, and also hit the button to get notified about every new video. So let's go. So if you want to follow the tutorial step by step, you'll need to go and download some files from the repo. You will find the link in the description. So when you go to the repo, you will download the files as a zip, for example. I will now open the zip file, and I'm just gonna copy the folder that says part 1. I'm gonna rename it to Tic Tac Toe, and then I will open my text editor. So I will open a folder on the desktop. Now for the files, you're gonna find inside the font, then the images, the one for O player, the tie image, and the X image for the player X. Now the game.js file, which is empty, the index.html file, and the options.js, and the style.css, the CSS code is already there. Now for the HTML, I'm gonna create the basic HTML file. I'm gonna set the title for our game. Then I'm gonna link the style.css file, and inside the body tag I'm gonna create the container and the canvas element with an ID, and the width and the height both set to 450 pixels. Then the options class or options dev with the class name options. I will run a live preview of the project. Now inside the options, it's an H1, the title of the game. Then H2 that says play versus. Inside two buttons, the computer and the friend button. Then another H2 that says symbol. Inside we have two buttons, an X button and an O button. Then the play button to play the game. Now the dev for the game over, which is hidden, so I'm going to say hide. At the bottom here I'm going to link the JavaScript files, the options and game.js, to the index.html file. Now if I click, nothing's happened, so we need to go inside our options.js and add some code here. The first thing, of course, is to select the elements. So I'm going to select the options element using the query selector method that takes in the class name. And also I'm going to select the game over element the same way. So I'm going to say game over. Then I'm going to select all the buttons. I'm just going to copy these and say here options, because all the buttons are inside the div called with the class name options. Here I'm going to say computer. I'm going to copy this 5 times. This will be for the friend button, here for X button, and O button, and play button. Now I will need to add an event listener to all of them, one by one. So one for the computer button, which is a click event. This will fire up this function here whenever I click on the computer button. I'm gonna copy this 5 times again. This is the one for friend, X, O, and play. Now, when I click on the computer and friend, I need to store those information somewhere, which means I need some variables to store the user's options. Now, the opponent variable here. So when I click on the computer, I'm going to set the opponent to computer. And when I click on the friend button, I'm going to set the opponent to friend. Now for the symbols too, we need a variable or an object player here. So when I click on X button, I'm going to set the player.man to X, uppercase, and player.computer to O, and player.friend also to O. I'm going to copy this inside the O button, and here I'm going to say O, and these are X. Now when I click on the computer, I need to add the active class name And when I click back on the friend button, I will need to remove it from the computer button and add it to the friend button. So I'm gonna create a function called switch active that will switch the active class name between two buttons. So for the one we say off, we're gonna remove the class name active, and the one we say on, we're gonna add the class active name. Here I'm gonna remove the class name active from friend button and add it to the computer button because I clicked on the computer button, and I'm gonna remove it from the computer button and add it to the friend button. Let's try that. It's working. Let's do the same thing for the X button and O button. Now O button, we're gonna remove it from O button and add the X button. This time I'm gonna remove it from the X button and add it to the O button. So it works. Now let's go and try the code for when I click on the play button. So when we click, we run the function init, and then we hide the options by removing or by adding the hide button to its class list. Let's try that. So it's not working. I'm gonna open my console. So here, okay, init is not defined. Really? So I'm gonna go to game.js and create a function init that takes into parameters player and opponent. Now if I click on play, you will face, or we will face, the canvas. Now for the play button, we still need to check if the user chose an opponent or not. So he has to choose an opponent. So I'm gonna use an if statement to check if there is no opponent. Then we need to make the computer button background color red, and also the friend button background color red. Then we say return to prevent the code at the bottom from running. So now if I check, the background of the buttons became red. I'm gonna do the same for the symbols. I'm gonna check if the user shows a symbol or not. So I'm gonna say player man. Here I'm gonna change the X and O button background color to red. Now if I click and play, I need to choose an opponent. I need to choose a symbol. Now I can run the game. Here I'm gonna add a comment that says run the game, and then I'll go inside the game.js. The first thing, of course, is to select the canvas. I'm gonna use the getElementById method to select our canvas. I'm gonna get the context of the canvas so we can draw on the canvas, for example. Then I'm gonna set the board variables. So our board is an array, two-dimensional array, which has 3 columns and 3 rows. Then every space in our board has a width and a height both equal to 150 pixels. Then I'm gonna create a function called DrawOnBoard, draw our board to canvas. I'm going to use a for loop to create the rows, and also another for loop to create the columns. And then I'm just gonna set the stroke style, the color of the stroke, to black, and stroke correct method to draw them, which takes in the X and Y and the width and height. The X, I times space size is the Y, space size for width, space size for height. So here I will need to use a comma. Now I will go and call the function DrawOnBoard. I'm going to change computer, O, play. Now we can see the board. Now we need to add an event listener to our canvas. So when we click on the canvas, we'll run a function that will take in the event, the click event, as an argument. From that, we're gonna get the X and Y position of the mouse click relative to our canvas, not to the viewport, which means we're gonna subtract the canvas.x using the getBounding client rect from the client X, and also the canvas.y position from the client Y. Now we will calculate I and j of the clicked space. So every space has a unique I and j. I'm gonna use math.floor to get an integer. Then here I will need to store the player moves to a one-dimensional array instead of the game board, or instead of the board, which is a two-dimensional array. So here, to link our game data to the board, we will give every space a unique ID. So for example, when I click on a space, I know what is the space I clicked on, and then I will know exactly which element I'm gonna update in the game data array. So I'm gonna set an ID for every space. I'm gonna increment the ID by 1. The two lines here are for drawing the spaces. Now here I will need to store the player's move to game data array. So I'm going to say game data with ID equals the current player equals X or O. So the current player here by default is the player.man. It could be X or O. So let current player equals player.man. Now here, after a player played, we need to give the turn to the other player. So simply I'm gonna use an if statement here. So I'm gonna use turn operator to check if the current player is the player.man, then set the current player to friend. If it's not, set it to player.man. Then here I will need to get the ID of the space we clicked on. So let ID equals board I, G, and X. Now when we click on the board, I will just console log that for now. So I'm going to choose friend, X symbol, play. Now if I click on the center space, you can see that on the console. The last one here, the first, the second, and the third. Now one problem, if I go and click on the first one, which is not empty, and keep clicking, you can see that we updated even if it's not empty. So I will need to check. I will need to check if the space is not empty. So that way we can prevent the player to play the same space twice. So I'm gonna check if the game data is there, then say return. Now if I try the same thing again, so I'm gonna go and try that. So here you can see that we can't play the same space twice. Now here, after the player played a space, we need to check if he's a winner. Then if he's not winner, we need to check if it's a tie game. So for winner combinations, we need to create an array called combos, which has all the winning combinations, like the ID of the spaces that if the player successfully put their symbol there, they are winning the game. So I will need a full loop to loop over all the arrays, over all the rows one by one. So I'm gonna create a function called isWinner. So function isWinner. The function here will loop over the combos array. So row by row, and then in every row we will assume the player is winning, so set the 1 to true, and then check if the player put their symbol in all the IDs or all the spaces. So I'm gonna use ID equals combos with ing, and then check for game data, is it have the same symbol or not. If 1 is true, return true. If it's not, return false. Here for our isWinner, it will take in game data. Oh, here I have to say game data is player. Now we need to check if there's a tie game. So if there's no winner and the board is fell, it's a tie game. So we're gonna assume that the board is filled. Then we're gonna loop over our game data array and check every space, if it's empty or not. So if all the spaces are not empty, it means that the board is filled. If just one of them is not empty, if just one of them is empty, then the board is not filled. Now for our isTie game, it will take in just one parameter, which is the game data array. So here I'm gonna say if is winner game data and the current player. We are checking if the current player is a winner. Then we show game over with the message and the image of the current player. The game over here is set to true, and if it's a tie, we're gonna do the same thing. Here it's just the game data, and now we show tie on the game over message. Here I'm gonna create the variable game over. So I'm gonna say let game over equals false. So it's now game over when the game starts. So here we need to check if it's a game over, we need to stop the function. So I'm gonna say if game over return. Now here I will need to create the function show game over. Our show a game over will take in just the player as a parameter. Then the message depends on if it's a tie, we show oops, no winner. If it's not a tie, we show the winner is. And then for the image source, all the images are inside the folder called the image, and the name is the name of the player or the argument for our show game over function. Now we need to change the inner HTML of game over element. We're going to set the H to 1. The H1 is our message, oops, no winner, or the winner is. Then an image with the class name winner image. The source image is the image source. Then the play again button, which has the class name play. On click, we are going to reload the page. And now we need to make the game over element visible. So we're going to remove the class name hide from its class list. Now here, instead of just console login the player's moves, we need to draw on board the player move. So here I will need to create or to load all the images, the X and O images. So they are the object image. Then I'm gonna give the source property of every image. So here it's X uppercase. Now for the O image, it's almost the same. I'm going to just change this to O, and here also to O. Now for the game or for the DrawOnBoard function, so it would take in the player. Then based on that player, we're gonna know which image we're gonna draw to on the board. So if it's X, we're gonna draw the X image. If it's O, we're gonna draw the O image. Now for the X position of the image we're gonna draw on the board are the X and Y of the clicked space. So if you remember, the X is given by J times space size and I times space size for the Y position. Now here I must add I and J and hit save. If I refresh now, I'm gonna choose friend, X symbol, play. I'm gonna try to win to see the show game over message. Oops, the image doesn't show, so I'm gonna inspect the element. Yeah, I need a space there, so I'm gonna go to our show game over message. I need a space here. Let's save that, refresh, friend X, play. Oh, still a problem with the play again. Oh yeah, I must say H1. Let's save again, friend X, play. And yeah, so everything is working. I'm gonna try to win with O's. Yep. Now let's try to get a tie game. X here. O, so X here. Okay, O must go here. Oops, no winner, tie game. So this is the end of our tutorial. Actually the first part of the tutorial. We still have a second part where we are going to implement the AI. So for now, our game gives us the possibility to play just with the friend. We still need to implement the AI so we can be able to play with the computer. So until then, see you, have a good time, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and put a comment if you want, and subscribe.